Great, well, I'll start us off. Hello and welcome to the Rhonda Harder Epp Artist Talk, hosted by the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre. My name is Mary and I'll be moderating this event. This talk is programming that has been and will be taking place throughout the duration of the Covered Ground Landscapes and Lichen Contemporary Art exhibit, which opened in early December of 2020. It will remain on display until late May of this year if anyone's local and able to come in. The Covered Ground show brings together Alberta artist Rhonda Harder Epp and Northwest Territories artist Tracey Bryant to present works inspired by Lichen and the land. Thank you all for tuning in this evening, and without much further ado, I'll pass you along to Rhonda.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak about my work. Thank you also to all of you for being here, whether you're at the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre or joining on Zoom. There is something a little surreal about this. Usually I count on the advantages of standing at some distance from my audience and using my hands while I talk. It is a little intimidating for me to imagine myself projected on a large screen in the auditorium, as well as on several small screens scattered around the country. With the aim of improving this experience, I will be showing lots of pictures. The audio guides are launching today, at least that's what I understood. So that will be a virtual way of participating, especially for those of us who cannot travel to see the exhibition in person. I hope you will join me in imagining that we are doing something this evening together. I would like to thank the people from the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre who I have met via email, conference call, or Zoom. At the risk of leaving someone out, my survey of contacts include Julie Ross, Scott Marsden, Mike Mitchell, Ray Braden, Mary Buckland, Dot Van Vliet, and Susan Irving. I'm especially grateful to Mary for her work putting this remote speaking event together, and I hope the changes I have made in my script since I sent it to her don't throw her off. I think I kept the cues in place. Everyone at the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre have been generous with their time and enthusiasm for this exhibition. I am really pleased that a decision was made to postpone the exhibition, which was to have started last June, rather than to cancel it. Because this is happening in the winter and during a pandemic, I was given the opportunity to learn something about shipping. I thank my husband Roger for building a very nice crate and the good people at Matco who managed to sort the particulars of moving it from Edmonton to Yellowknife. I would also like to thank Sarah Swan for her article in the Galleries West magazine. It makes me blush with satisfaction. This evening, getting to the purpose for being here, I would like to tell you about what inspired my lichen pieces and what some of the steps were in figuring out a visual direction. I will show you photos of how I made them and talk about what projects have come after. But perhaps I should start with a little bit about who I am. I have spent most of my life in Alberta. I was born in Didsbury, grew up in Edmonton, went to university in Lethbridge, lived in Camrose for 21 years, and moved back to Edmonton nearly 10 years ago. I live close to the river valley, so my nature deficit is less than you might think. I am definitely a prairie person and will defend the geography, which is diverse and grand. And as to Alberta's reputation, though sometimes sadly deserved, I can say that people here are also more diverse than is often recognized. I have also lived in Winnipeg and Kingston, Ontario, and had shorter stints in the UK, Brazil, and Asheville, North Carolina. I started out as a teacher, specializing in early childhood education, and seriously made my way to art in my 30s after having my kids. I have always been the kind of person who made stuff. Mary Pratt, an artist from Newfoundland, once said, "Women from the Maritimes only start to grow up when they're well over 30. I am not from the Maritimes, but in terms of coming into my own, this was probably true for me as well. I usually paint and thrive on color. My projects tend to be about making visual images out of conceptual ideas. Or said another way, my work is usually about something. Often it is representational and metaphoric. That is the kind of thing I write for an artist's statement. Let me show you what I mean. This is a painting called Us versus Them. It is from a series I worked on for 5 years called Walls, Arbitrary Impediments. This was inspired by walls that had come down, particularly the Berlin Wall, and walls that were going up. The wall between the US and Mexico comes quickly to mind, but there are others around the world that are very similar. The governing conceptual idea is that walls and borders, often created arbitrarily, make divisions between people, divisions of potential, prosperity, perspective, and culture, to name a few. When I say that my work is at least partially representational, I think you can see and identify tomatoes and pears. You can see a few ladders, a fence, and the light through an open door. This is where metaphor takes over. The tomatoes and pears, though different fruits, share some characteristics: roundness, color at some stages, and size. They can mix together without huge contrast. Imagine the tomatoes and pears are groups of people, perhaps of different religions or races or cultures, a diverse population. In this painting, unlike some others in the series, a boundary, this time represented by the red chain link fence, is not dividing the group, but suggests a more subtle division or division awareness. I provide ladders and a door. This is me providing escape routes from conflicts, bad governance, and hateful behavior. It is not really optimistic. It is more of a wish for respite or grounds for hope that there is an after. So there is a conceptual idea about walls with imagery that is representational and metaphoric. I have explored other topics like the feminine heroic quest, the blue stocking intellectual group, portraiture, time and space. Time is still a matter of fascination for me. It seems to be a very elastic medium. Schumann's piano pieces, scenes from childhood, and Islamic geometric designs. My productivity has been low the last few years because I had the honor and the responsibility of caring for my parents as their capacities declined as they entered their 90s. They died within 7 months of each other. My dad in October of 2019, my mom died in May of this year. Besides the emotional impact of loss, I have not come to a full understanding of the impact of that caring time on me. Words and images are moiling, and I trust that in time they will settle and maybe into something tangible. The projects I have done most recently, which I will talk about later, have been small ones, some related to remembrance, and I have done very little painting. Moving on now to the Lichens project in white, the inspiration. I will be the first to admit that my experiences in the North have been limited. In 2014, my husband and I spent a weekend at Blatchford Lake in the Northwest Territories. This was related to his work with the University of Alberta. We went on a hike, as one does, and it was important to pay close attention to the footing. Maybe because it was autumn and the other forest colors were muted, I started to notice lichens in a new way. They presented in such an amazing array of shapes and colors. Most of my photos from that hike are of the ground, and mostly close to the ground. I often take photos of experiences with the vague notion of how they might collectively become a story. In this case, the story could have been told by a creature whose point of view was about knee-high. The landscape in the broader sense, though magnificent, got less of my attention. Another time, Roger and I flew to Yellowknife for a few days of exploring. We did the Cameron Falls hike. As I explained in the audio guide, one aspect of this experience was becoming aware of the immensity of the Canadian Shield. As we walked that day, I kept having a sense of having been somewhere similar before. Then it hit me. Though there were different kinds of trees, the terrain was a lot like the landscape around Kingston, Ontario, where I had lived for 5 years. That the North is magnificently huge was clear to me. that the geography of the North connected with a different place and time in my life was a surprise. The sensation of immensity landed firmly on my fascination with the micro world. I went home, filed the photos, worked on other projects, and let the inspiration take its own sweet time. How does an inspiration become a visual direction? Mostly that is a mystery. In my experience, it is the combination of my endeavor and the seemingly out of nowhere delivery of an idea. I'm going to show you some of my endeavor. This includes a trip into my sketchbook, which is a little bit like me opening up and displaying what is in my closets. Sometimes I implement, which means I put it on my list, a 20-minute daily sketchbook rule. This helps me establish some discipline. I set my timer for 20 minutes and do something, anything in a sketchbook. That part is pretty simple. I fall in and out of this habit. It is easier to continue if I have a theme to explore. Ideas generate ideas. Lichens popped up as a notion, and one of the first things I loved about them was their design potential. As you see, the shapes that I use to evoke a sense of variety and texture are all really simple and repeatable. I use grayscale pens because, for someone who tends to fuss, these pens allow me to start with 10% gradient, which hardly shows on the paper, and slowly increase intensity with darker pens. This is one workaround I use to get over the way I commonly stumble. The pens help me loosen up. Circles entered the playing field early. I tried color. I dropped color. I designed and printed tea towels using a very low-tech method. I set myself up to paint. The vision was convoluted. I experimented. I hoped endeavor would help consolidate a direction. This did not happen. The idea shriveled. And then I found paper. This was a bit of an offshoot of something else I was doing. Up to this point, I have been talking about lichens as if they are all about design. Before I go on, I should tell you what else fueled the inspiration. The part of me that needs to be about something pushed me into a bit of research. For one thing, lichens live in a wide variety of environments, including harsh ones. They are tenacious in an awe-inspiring way. They deserve more attention than they get. Secondly, even given their hardiness, lichens are sensitive to environmental disturbance. The idea of an environment being at risk and that lichens could be indicators of health or decline gives some hefty significance and a bigger purpose to the humble lichen. Not that they need to justify themselves with a purpose. Okay, that's settled. Let me return now to the experiments with paper and endeavoring towards a vision. I cut things in a paper doll sort of a way, and I manipulated shapes that I made with paper punches. Stars became pentagons, for example. I made samples where I tried massing these cutouts together. Then I collected a variety of colored papers ready to convert the experiments into a full palette. As you saw with my painting, I'm not afraid of color. But there was something messing with the vision. This was a moment of reckoning. First came the comeuppance. Although I don't believe I said it out loud, after reading an article about an artist who had painted with whites for decades, I had thought, how pathetic is that? After recognizing that I was contemplating exploring white, I knew I would find out if it was pathetic or not. Secondly, I needed to review the relationship between color and texture. I needed to determine which was the more important one here. It is not that they cannot work together, but in this case, I was not finding the way to partner them successfully. Accentuating texture seemed to demand restraining color. When I started collecting white paper, there was more variety than one might have thought. I believe a trip to the hardware store paint department will confirm the truly amazing and subtle variations of white. And for a little added entertainment, it's worth checking out their fascinating names. At this point, I was off and running, or more accurately, I was snipping and gluing. I have talked about the inspiration and the journey to find a visual direction. Now I will show you a little bit about how I made the lichen pieces. When I took the photos that accompanied this section, I was doing it for my records, not with the idea that they would become presentation material. The lighting in the room I was working in was better than the photos will suggest. For the work on one section, I took a series of photos 20 minutes apart. 20 minutes is my unit of measure for many things. Rest easy, I'm not showing every interval. The piece of work I documented was on Lichen number 1, the biggest piece. It is 47 inches in diameter. Foam core, the backing for all the pieces, comes in 4 by 8 foot sheets like plywood, so this presented an obvious size limit. I always thought of these pieces as circular. I cannot remember making a decision about this. The area I worked on was a circle about 12 inches in diameter. I will apologize for my inconsistency regarding units of measure. I am a fully functioning metric user, but I have some old tools and some imperial lapses. First, I cut some flower shapes with the paper punch. You see here an array of tools I used. One thing I'm particularly fond of is the hole punch that has changeable parts for making a variety of sizes of holes, all smaller than a regular hole punch. Here I have a pile of flowers. You see at the top of the photo a remnant of the paper from which I punched the flowers. I will use that. It is a positive and negative space kind of thing. It was an unintended discovery. Still more prep at the desk. I punched small holes in some petals and slit others with scissors. I have used 2 shades of white paper. With cut pieces in hand, I started this section by setting up a boundary at the top of the circle with one of the negative space pieces. Then I started placing in the flowers one at a time, bending and molding them a little. I used tweezers to hold the flower pieces, and the eraser end of a pencil to help press them into place. I used strong craft glue. In this photo, I have set up another negative space boundary. If you're wondering, this is an activity that I had to do standing up and leaning over. It is a really good way to get a crick in your back. Work proceeds. I made a circle within the space out of a different size of flowers. Periodically, I had to go cut some more parts. As I said before, I'm not showing every photo. As you see, I am not averse to repetitive activities, but I will qualify that by saying I'm not averse to repetitive activities of my own choosing and towards my own goals. This is a different view of the completed section. The finished piece, or this is the finished piece. The part that I showed being worked on is at the bottom. You can see that little backwards 3 thing. This is Lichen number 1. It is 47 inches or 120 centimeters in diameter. For the benefit of the people who haven't seen the lichen pieces, I am going to show some photos of them now. This does not give you a view of the exhibition, but helps qualify what I'm talking about. I think the pairing in the exhibition with Tracey Bryant's paintings is brilliant. She sorted out the color and texture factor. So this is lichen number 2. It's 37 inches or 94 centimeters across. And a detail. This is lichen number 3. It's 17 inches or 43 centimeters across, which you can't tell when it's on a screen, but we've gone quite a bit smaller. This one has one shape repeated with different papers and directional placement. And a detail. Lichen number 4, this is 8 inches or 21 centimeters across. And number 5, it's the same size, 8 inches or 21 centimeters across. And a detail. I have told you about the inspiration for the lichen pieces. I took you on the journey of finding a visual direction, and I have showed you some of the process in making them. Now I will talk about and show you things that I have made since. It looks like a shift paper. In 2016, I had the opportunity to be part of a group who supported the arrival and settling of a Syrian refugee family in Edmonton. I took inspiration from the colorful and artfully arranged hijab I saw women wearing at Muslim events I attended. Around the same time, being open to Islamic cultural references, I heard an interview with Zara Hussein. She was doing awesome work with Islamic geometric designs using lights digitally programmed. She said that all a person needed to make Islamic geometric designs was a middle school geometry set, specifically a compass and a ruler. Learning to make the designs is a little more challenging than the tools suggest, but I was committed to trying. That year, I needed a smallish project, one that I could actually make progress on, as well as keep up with all my family settlement commitments. I first decided to do small paintings of scarves, and then added the part with an interpretation of the painting in a paper cut design based on an Islamic geometric design. The paintings and the paper cuts are 6 inches or 15 centimeters square. There are 12 pairs. I did 1 pair a month. It's hanging behind me if you can see me, but maybe not. This is January. I arranged the scarf and laid a frame with a 15 centimeter square hole over it. The paintings are a 1-to-1 representation. To some extent, the interpretation ended up being a design I was learning to make at the time. I needed to be proficient enough with the design to manipulate it. I used my own scarves. This is March. This is May, August, and October. If you want to look at these more, you can visit my website, which is simply www.rhondaharderepp.com. What follows are some miscellaneous projects with paper. At the point when the Syrian family was getting more independent, my parents were showing signs that their independence was waning. What I can say is this: it is easier to assist to build independence, as with the refugee family, than it is to discern when independence is becoming a safety concern. Taking steps to mitigate needs was difficult relationally and emotionally. I have either become less adept at managing multiple responsibilities, or the various factors of seeing my parents through their final years took a lot of mental space. In any event, I seem to have had small ideas, one of projects. First, the book house or house book. Seeing a cut up book may send shivers up some of your spines. The thing is, there are some books, and this is a Persuasions Journal, a yearly publication from the Jane Austen Society, which I have read cover to cover. There are some books that eventually have no place to go. Especially with digital everything, old journals will not find a second home. And in that territory between cherished item and garbage, it takes up space on a shelf. I have chosen to alter the options to include potential artistic materials. I made this out of one of my dad's old dictionaries. This was a hardback Webster's with particularly nice, firm, but thin pages. First, I cut out the vase. Then, from all the paper cuttings, I made hydrangeas. There is an element of the lichens about them. You will recognize the topic here. This COVID-19 was made from 4 glossy page journals stuck together and folded. A few pages were stolen to make the spikes, and it received its just desserts. And a very recent sculpture. This bird is a relation to the Bohemian waxwing. I did not attempt the detail and accuracy that would recommend it to an ornithologist. What I can say is that it was made entirely with materials I had at hand. I would like to conclude with a little glimpse into the future. I understand that the museum will be working towards having a workshop that I lead from a distance. I would like to show you the project I have suggested. This borrows from things I learned about making the forms on the Lichen project. Translucent papers allow light through. The light itself is from one of those battery-powered tea lights. A real tea light, of course, would produce effects more like the situation with the paper COVID in the fire pit. Thank you once again very much for being here and hearing me out. I hope you have found something interesting.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. I'm going to field some questions, maybe, if you guys want to add them in the chat or the Q&A. I suppose I have one myself. Paula saying, very good job. I have one, I think it's been, you were working on the lichens partially into last year, is that correct?
No, they were done quite a bit earlier.
Do you see yourself going back to them? Because they are a very interesting form, and we do receive a lot of compliments on them here. People are very astounded by the amount of work that goes into them, and maybe that's one of the reasons why you maybe haven't returned to them, especially the larger pieces.
Well, there's something functional about making things, and if they don't have a place to go, it depends how much space you have to put a thing in. My house is only so big. I can only make so many things. Could I go back to them? I think I probably could. I could. I learned things along the way as I made them, and I think there are more things that could be experimented with and figured out.
Of course. Well, people are always very interested in quite how long it took you to make some of these pieces. But I think you told me that you stepped in and out, so maybe it wasn't always a constant process. It looks like
well, in the process of making them, there are different things to do. You can't. Sometimes it's cutting, and sometimes it's gluing, and so there is a bit of a balance there. But yes.
I timed my segue very well because Samreen actually just asked, how long did it take to finish? Thinking of the smaller pieces, would you be able to estimate?
Well, okay, if you take that 12-inch part that I worked on, and it was done in 20-minute intervals, and I didn't show all the pictures. So it's, that was probably 2.5 to 3 hours for that little part. And that one was like not the most complicated section. Time is a little bit hard to, like an artist, or I don't know of one, and I have never considered thinking of an hourly wage because it would just be way too depressing.
So you're not considering each flower like a Seurat dot, are you?
No.
Every single eraser press isn't a unique wage stamp, is it? Well, actually, I wanted to go back to that point that you made about that artist who painted only in white. Do you have reflections now that you've sort of not completed the project, but completed this moment working in all white? Would you say
yes.
You called it pathetic at one point?
Oh no, I absolutely did. Like I say, I don't think I said it out loud because that's really, problematic and you have to deal with that. but it just did seem odd to me. What all is there to do? And I guess I remembered it because as I was turning to white papers, I just did recall that I had disparaged this as a notion. And it's that kind of thing that sticks in the brain. I wouldn't be able to find that article or figure out who that artist was. Maybe a Google search would do the trick, but it's something that I had read, and obviously I had filed it.
You really clung
And
to it
actually,
at one point, I'm sure.
white is quite complex.
Of course, actually, so I'm going to jump over. I've got a couple questions here, but I'm going back to Samarine because they're wondering. One more question. Where did you find all the different papers, different shades of white? Do you have a particular store, or were you really searching for them?
Each sketchbook, when it's a little different weight and a little different, white. Not all the papers were as conservation wise as would be good, and then there's there's some that are kind of more vellum-ish, and so I even used photo paper because it's shiny, and there were other papers that were iridescent. It isn't actually that hard to find it's not copy paper, but, sketchbooks and a paper store, there are quite a few options.
Paula is wondering, could you speak to about the structural similarity between lichen and lace? Did you pick up at that at all when you were working in this sort of detailed practice?
Well, in the aspect, especially of the positive and negative, lace is certainly a design, and there's holes, and in a sense there is certainly a lace-ish quality, and I know Paula is a knitter and would knit also lace things that are intricate. And she stumped me on this one.
Well, I noticed also because you have punched holes in the flowers, but I think also in because some of the pieces are quite beyond textural, they have shape to them. They have like humps and mounds, and some of those humps and mounds have holes in them. So how much thought was going into that, or was it more of a meditative, you're in the moment and it's happened?
Well, I guess it's the lightness and the airiness, which is a lacy type of thing for sure. It would be wrong to say everything was intentional, because some things are serendipitous, but all of serendipitous or not, there's an action that it comes to a certain end. I think lace is more structured in a particular way than these were.
Great. Well, maybe Paula can follow up and poke you a bit more about that. Julie, who's one of our fellow Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre staff members, has a question for you. And she was wondering, did you mess up sometimes? But I guess that also precludes the question, was there ever really a direct vision, or were you working so much in the moment that there wasn't a concept of messing up?
I'm not, messing up could be thought of in quite a variety of ways. There's not ever a time when I was working on a piece that I scrapped some section and pulled it off. That didn't happen. It could usually, if there was a mess up, if I was cutting something and it fell apart before I got it to the place I wanted to be, that could be considered a mess up. Or structures that I attempted that didn't hold up, but that was also before they actually got stuck onto something. In this case, like when I'm painting, I paint over things all the time. often upsets my husband because he likes it at a certain place, and then I do something else with it, and he says, "What?" You know that. But with the lichens, it was more a matter of building, and I worked on such small areas at a time that it was not that in especially in the big, well, even in the littler ones, that I thought, okay, I'm going to do this over here and this over here, and it's going to be this kind of plan. That wasn't how this went about. They just grew, and I think, okay, now it needs this thing, or now in that way. Does that address the messing up question?
I think so. I think so, and that speaks really lovely to the fact that they are lichen pieces. Lichen, you know, the way they grow and develop is sporadic, I think at best. Maeve is asking, a lot of the paper pieces continue to be monochrome. That's probably also referential to the book pieces that you've been doing. I mean, obviously they don't come with a whole lot of color, but do you see yourself adding color into your paper projects? For example, with the hydrangeas and the vase piece.
Well, that is a particular thing because it was all from the dictionary. And in that way, as a remembrance piece, it was, you know, it needed to be that. I would never say that no, I'm not going to do color in that. It's just that the things I was doing were coming out of a certain thing that made it be the direction I should go. Like recently, I spray painted dehydrated pears and they're pink, you know, and then I thought it needed a stick, so I spray painted one yellow. So I guess that wasn't monochrome, but I can't say why I did those things.
Certainly not afraid of color then.
No.
Julie's asking, do you have a favorite paper to work with? Then you listed, you know, vellum and photo paper and iridescent papers. I've worked with a kind of vellum that the moment it got remote, like a tiny drizzle of water on it, it shrunk up kind of funny. And so the moment you had to keep it off of every surface that possibly could have had water. And once I had to walk in the rain with it, and it just, entire project gone. So, well, there's a secondary question. What was your favorite paper? And which one was your least favorite paper?
Well, this is also a little bit relational because I liked it if in that thing of working with whites, and if one would be slightly different than another so that I could make a contrast, obviously subtle, between the kinds. I guess I kind of, all of the papers have a certain amount of body that I could put them in a place and they would stand up or do what they were supposed to do. A favorite, well, it needed to have body, but if it was too heavy, it was too hard to cut. So I didn't like the kinds that were too hard to cut because then it doesn't work. It's frustrating. This needed a variety, and I just put in a photo paper would not be my favorite. It just was that it would just be different, so it served a purpose in that way. But I'm not looking towards doing all kinds of stuff with photo paper.
It was a good grounding agent for the rest of the materials to speak.
Yeah,
Is that?
do something, you know, they have these ones, and then this one's going to be shiny because it's on photo paper. Yeah.
Excellent. Paula has a question from Emma. She says, what artistic urge does a sculptural quality of paper satisfy that painting doesn't? Some good stumpers from Paula and Emma.
Yes, I know these people. I guess that's what my brain is thinking about these days. And there's no reason why I shouldn't. I painted a very, very small picture this last year. I'm not sure why I'm thinking three-dimensionally a lot. I'm really good at making boxes. Like, I have thought that really my calling should have been packaging. So maybe this thing with paper and doing birds and hydrangeas is really some instinctual thing about making something three-dimensional. I don't know.
All right, I've got a couple from here from Natasha that I kind of missed. Sorry, Natasha. She says, I see the evolution in your newer projects of finding the medium between texture and color. For all texture to color, where do you like to play the best?
Between texture and color. Well, you know, I think I should really aim at putting texture and color together. I think that really should be my next project. When the Islamic geometric designs, they have lots of color, but they're flat. The Bohemian waxwing has some color, kind of, but it, you know, they're not exuberant. And I really, it is not that I don't think texture and color can function together. But when I was, like I said, when I was doing these lichen pieces, I couldn't. I had the color paper all around me, and I knew that the thing that would hit the eye was, oh, isn't that colorful? And it would miss the other stuff. Gee, these people ask really hard questions.
Well, I've got another one from her that might be a little bit easier. Natasha also asks, is there a fixed lifespan to the pieces based on the materials used?
Only time will tell. I will admit that not all the papers were high conservation quality. I think anything that is out of paper, you know, where it's three-dimensional and has to live in the world, there are potential difficulties because you can't really clean them and things can happen. So I don't know what the lifespan is, but it is less than an oil painting.
Of course, yeah. And how did you find working with the foam core base? Well, here's actually the tertiary question, I guess, is, so it's a foam core base, but how exactly have you set it up so it can hang on the wall? Because I know foam core obviously is a slippery and also easily dentable surface.
I knew that if I did things on the front, I needed to, there are wood slats stuck on the back, which I did first because foam core will bend. I think one of them is a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit bending. But I anticipated that foam core needed something to stabilize it. So that's what's on the back. And then that's what the hangers are connected to on the big pieces. And how we're working on foam core. Oh, good.
Great. I just know it dents it really easily, and the moment I've made any kind of error, I'm like, no.
You don't get to walk on it and you know, put your knees through it or any of that stuff. I understood the you know, how to treat it.
Our auditorium folks actually have a question. Are the flower punches off the shelf, or are some of them custom made?
Oh no, they're off the shelf.
And how many sizes of holes, actually, this is a personal question, does your little hole punching tool make?
I think it might be 5.
It's an excellent little tool. It adds so much extra texture to those little flower pieces. It makes every single one of them so unique and stand out. So I think they're really excellent.
Yeah.
Great. I think I'll give a second for folks to add in any questions, but I think you really covered a lot of bases there. And if anyone feels like they have, or not more questions, but would like to know more, Rhonda has recorded an audio guide, so people who are locally in Yellowknife can come by and listen to Rhonda's audio guide. It's about 10 minutes long, and she goes over a little bit of what we covered today, but a lot more into detail about the pieces that are literally on our walls and into how she made them. It's a really excellent little piece. But I think that's it for folks here. So I'll do a little send off then. Before we say goodbye, I'd just like to, well, remind locals that the show will be on display. Oh, actually, we have one more question. Auditorium folks. Oh, this is an excellent question, actually, because this is one that I've been wondering. How are those mounded sections made? Are they sort of cut and domed paper? How did you build up those hummocks?
They are paper. Well, like if you were going to make these aren't a sphere, but if you were going to make a sphere out of paper, you need to cut. This is talking with the hands on the screen just is really doesn't work very well. Well, you kind of cut pie type shape pieces so that they can overlap a little bit and then make your, oh boy, this is
Would you say it's a bit like cutting almost a paper crown and folding all the tips over each other?
Yes,
Okay.
I would say it's kind of like that. Thank you. And then yes, and then you make, yes, there you are. That's it.
No worries. I've had my own time to think about how to make them, so I was trying to figure out myself, reverse engineering from what I've seen on the wall to what I think it would be. So I've had some time. Great. Well, I'll relay some information from the crowd. Natasha says, thanks for sharing your artistic closet. And Paula says, more clapping. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
I think if that's the last of the questions, then yeah, I'll sign us out here. So yeah, the show is on until the end of May. The Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre is open from 1 to 5, Wednesday to Sunday, and admission is free. The artists have, of course, recorded these lovely audio guides. Tracey has included her own, which is also 10 minutes, and she goes over her works, which are all in encaustic and very interesting. I'd like to thank Dot for her help this evening and our physical audience for coming into the museum despite the cold outside, and then of course our virtual audience for tuning in remotely. And of course, finally, I would like to thank Rhonda for her time this evening. We wish that you could be here in person to see the show, but we're very glad that you could make it virtually to this event and for all the lovely programming you're doing for us.
Thank you very much.